Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. I think we'll kick off. Obviously, running this sort of an event on Zoom is not as good as running it in person, but I think we're pretty with Zoom these days, and you realise why we've got to do it like this. As I said earlier, we had 43 people register, and then we have our panellists as well. So I'm Leslie Hughes, in case you don't know me. I know it looks like I'm Emily Brennan, but I'm not. How we'll be running is that we have 6 panellists. We have 4 people who have sat on promotion committees at levels A and B. I'm going to introduce those people shortly. We also have 2 people who successfully achieved being promoted last year from level B to C, I think. And so we're going to also be asking them about their experiences. So thank you all for joining, and especially thank you to the panellists. All right, what I'm going to do is firstly introduce one by one, tell you who's here that will be on the panel, and then I'm going to invite them one by one to speak. So remember to unmute yourselves, otherwise I'll have to shout at you to unmute yourself. And we are all experienced with people talking on Zoom on mute and us not being able to hear them. So let me begin with Grant Hose. Perhaps you could wave when I introduce you. Grant Hose, who is one of my colleagues in biological sciences in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. Grant has been on the Level C Promotions Committee for that faculty. We have Wiley Bradford. Wiley, there you are, wave. Wiley is in the Macquarie Business School, and he has sat on Level B and C committees. So thank you, Wiley, for joining us. You will have much wisdom to impart. We have Linda Evans from Arts. Linda, where are you? There you are. She has sat on the Level B panel. We have Verity Pacey. Where are you, Verity? There you are. Verity is on the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences Level C panel. And then we have our 2 successful panellists, Alexandra Barty. Alex, where are you? There you are. Who was promoted to Level B last year in medicine. And Murray Taylor from the Business School. Murray, there you are, who was promoted to Level C. So thank you all very much for joining us. So I'm going to, I do want to draw your attention to the chat box. Some of you have sent in questions already, and we'll be able to get to those after the panellists have had a bit of talking. If you have more questions, please put them in the chat box. You can put them in any time, and hopefully we've got enough time to get to all of those questions. If there are a question directed to a particular person from a particular faculty, please say so. Otherwise, we'll assume that they're general questions, and I will be asking any panelists to just unmute and start talking. So let me begin with Grant, who is sitting there in Antarctica, surrounded by penguins. Grant, could you tell us a bit about your experience on the panel? Our brief for the panellists before they came to this was to perhaps say something about what they see as the value and purpose of the interview process, what you look for from interviewees, what makes a good or a poor interviewee, common mistakes that interviewees make and how to avoid them, and some top interview tips. And we'll come back at the end of the session to reiterate the top tips. To address some of these issues, please don't feel you need to address all of them, because if Grant addresses all of them, there won't be anything left for the other panellists to talk about. So Grant, over to you. Tell us, or tell rather the people that are applying for promotion this year, or in some cases next year, what you think they need to know.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie, and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along. I've been at Macquarie now 12 years. and was promoted to professor coming up 2 years ago. And last year was my first time on the selection panel, the interview panel for these positions, which is a really fantastic learning exercise. I guess my advice is, and one of the things I see that applicants find most challenging with our promotion system is actually understanding what of your skills and achievements go in which section of your application, under which heading do they go, and that's probably the biggest challenge, and understanding the subtleties and the differences between those, so you can articulate your best attributes under the right heading and get your appropriate points for those. So that's probably the biggest advice, and I know that's something that we'll probably discuss and cover some more today. In terms of turning up for an interview, it's always a nerve-wracking and challenging time, but be yourself and just be prepared. Read your notes, read your application, know what you've said so you can back it up, because you will be asked to back it up. You will be asked to elaborate. The panel has read your CV and your application. They know what you're saying about yourselves, and they'll already have a fair idea in their mind about whether you meet the criteria for promotion. So understand what you've said and be confident to back those up and things you said with examples or with other examples that you may or may not have used in your application. So with that, rather than going on Leslie's very long list of things, which I'm sure other panelists will cover, I'll pass back to Leslie, and thanks again for coming along.
Thanks, Grant, and thanks for bringing up the challenge of what to put where. What I would emphasise to you, and I haven't sat on a panel, but I was part of the working party that devised the new scheme, is that it has been set up deliberately to be flexible. So there isn't really a right or wrong answer to that question. It has been set up, hopefully, to allow you to make your best case. The one thing we do emphasise is not to double dip. So if you've claimed something under research, you can't also claim that same thing in another column. But there is flexibility in the system, and it's hopefully set up to give you the choice. Now, choice can be difficult, it takes more thinking, but please be assured that the reason for that choice is to actually allow people to make the very best case for themselves. Okay, thanks, Grant. Let's go to Wiley next. Wiley, your preliminary thoughts as a panelist. And Wiley, could I also ask you, because you've sat on both B and C committees, if there are specific differences between the experiences on those two? There may not be. We'd be really happy to hear you talk about that as well.
Well, in that one, I would say the main difference is just obviously the expectations are different, and I think in the case of a level B, in a sense, is kind of like, we don't really have level A so much. It's more like an entry level type thing. Level C is where you're looking as to whether somebody, is ready to step up. So there's obviously some more expected of them, and maybe, looking for a little more kind of gravitas there. But I would say, look, generally, as Grant said, I know it's easy to say, but you just try to be relaxed and try to be yourself. What the purpose of the interview is for people to be able to get to see the person, right? They've seen the stuff on paper, but we want to see the person, and you want to get an impression of the person, an impression of how organized they are in what they do, and how well they've got that kind of, conceptualized. It's important to remember too that this goes with the application part, which is already closed, obviously, but this is a promotion interview. It's not a job interview. So really, we're looking at kind of value added, if you like, since the last time that you progressed. And so don't get caught into walking in there to say, well, it's my entire life story that I'm using to justify this, because it's really an increment from the last time that you're actually promoted or when you were appointed. So it's important to remember that. One thing I will say about being prepared, and something which struck me in the last round at level C, is it's very important particularly, I would say, not only with things like teaching philosophy, but particularly with research, what stands out clearly when we're talking to people in the interview is people come across very well when they're able to give they're very able to give a very clear description of what they do in research, why they do it, why it's important, what the benefits are. And there's, you can see a real split there between people who, when you ask them that, they kind of don't really have much of an answer beyond, well, this is what I've done. And without a kind of a real why. And we all know that it's a requirement of your job to do research, but you don't want to come across as saying, well, here's all this research that I've done and I did it because I have to do it. As opposed to someone who's saying, look, I have a clear reason why I'm doing it. I have a clear reason why it's important. I know why. And to be able to explain that to the panel of people who are educated people, but are not obviously in your area, but to be able to get a very clear picture across of what your research involves and why it's important, because that also speaks to someone having a very well organized research program that they've conceptualized well, and you can really believe, well, they're going to go on with that. So part of the organization part is be able to explain what you do, and this applies to every area, but the research one stands out quite a lot, obviously, but be able to give a very clear description of what you do, what you've done, why you've done it, what kind of value that it brings. That just helps to make you look like someone, more like someone who is ready to be progressed and is ready to step up and take on a bigger position. So that one I would say is really important. Be able to do that, and that's what marks you out as being, because you want to impress people in the interview. That's what you want to do. You want to see people going, yeah, this person's got it. And being organized and being able to describe something like that in that way really, really helps that, and that really marks you out.
Thanks, Wiley. That's terrific advice. And I know in previous sessions like this, people have emphasized exactly that same point and have said the people that come across as passionate about their research, that's really, really important. And it's really about, as Wiley says, articulating a clear vision, not just of what you've done, but where you're headed. That's really key. So thanks for that, Wiley. Let's go to Linda now, who was on the arts level B panel. Linda.
Thank you. Sorry, I've had enough coffee. Thank you. Look, I think Grant and Wiley have sort of said a lot of what I already was sort of thinking. As Wiley said, it's you're not being hired for a job. This is the thing to remember. I've also written down in my notes, it's not an oral exam either. It's a discussion with colleagues. It's an opportunity to share who you are and what you've been doing, some of which they will already know because they will have read about it in your application materials, but it's an opportunity to tell them a bit more. And as just saying, Leslie, to show your enthusiasm for what you're doing. So with some of the questions that you are asking us to address here is what do we look for in the applicants. So I'm looking for somebody who is answering the questions clearly, so they actually provide an answer to the actual question, not around the question, but also succinctly, so it doesn't go on too long, and who probably will look nervous. I think everybody will get nervous in this situation, but shows some level of assurance when they're actually, and confidence and enthusiasm when they're actually answering the questions. So I can say too, I've only sat on the panel once before. I was nervous in it, right? So sometimes it can be on both sides as well. So it's a shared experience, I think in many ways. And perhaps, I don't know, is it worthwhile just saying what the process is, what actually happens, at least from my own experience, is that at the time the person comes into the room, sits down, is allowed to get themselves comfortable. The panel is chaired in the Faculty of Arts, at least by the Dean. So the Dean asks whether the applicant is comfortable, ready to go. She introduces all the panel members to the applicant. And then each one of us has already been given one question to ask. Each one has just one question. It starts with the Dean. She asks the first question, and then once the applicant has answered her question, it moves on to another panel member. And there might be a little bit of follow-up question to that particular person's question, but in general, there's just one question per person. So I don't know whether that's a helpful piece of information or not too. It's not sort of a free-for-all. There are certain questions that have been decided are needed in order to get a little bit more extra information that perhaps is not apparent in the actual written application.
Yes, so Linda, perhaps you could expand on the fact that the questions are not going to be the same for every applicant.
No, that's right.
And they tend to, is my understanding that they tend to be targeted at those categories that people have claimed the most points in.
Yes.
So the ones that will be the subject of the most sort of conversation. So do you want to expand on that?
I think it's, I would say there's only got one experience to go on, but yes, I think it would be that the most interest is in those areas where someone has said, I believe I'm excellent in that particular area. But I think some of the questions too, Leslie, were where there were points where it wasn't quite clear, or if someone had said, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. Can you tell us a bit more about that? How does that relate to that particular area? So for me, a lot of it was about just clarification, has been about clarification of what's been said in the application. I should have said too, because one of the questions later asked about this, the Dean, at least with each applicant, began with saying, do you have anything new that you want to tell us about? So that there were updates. If someone had said perhaps in their paper that they were going, in their application, that they were going to be publishing a paper in the next few months, where is that at? You have an opportunity to actually bring the panel up to date. Yeah.
So if I could add to that, so when these interviews are live, which is the usual way, often an applicant will bring along a piece of paper with an update on it. Obviously, you're not going to be bringing on bits of paper this time. But we will clarify with HR what the best mechanism will be to provide an update. Unfortunately, Catherine McDonald, who I would have asked that, couldn't be with us now, but we will follow up with HR and get back to you as to the best way to deliver, if you want to deliver an update on paper, as well as an update orally. So thanks for that, Linda. Okay. And I'm going to come back and ask the panelists more questions, but let's go now to Verity.
Thanks, Leslie. I guess one thing to think about when you're heading in is that the interview panel is made up of academics from your faculty, but there's very diverse roles that people do within the faculty. So I know when I sat on the panel last year, I do a comprehensive position of teaching and research, but there were research only people who were applying, and there were people who did a lot of teaching and not much research applying as well. So it's a good idea to sort of set the context of your role and your discipline for the panel as well, so they have an understanding as to how you sit in comparison. And some of that will come across in your written application that they would have already read, but often some of the questions may just be around that, to sort of explain a little bit more about how your group works or how your department functions, and what the role is within that department and across the university sort of activities. I think that's something to really get ready. And remember when you're talking as well, that while they're academics, they may not have the same professional and academic terms that you're used to talking about when you describe your research. So make sure that you're pitching it at the level where everyone's going to be able to easily comprehend what you are actually discussing at the time. I guess Wiley also covered research really nicely in what he spoke about, but I would say the same things for teaching as well. So we want to see passion. We don't want to just hear kind of the buzzwords around teaching. We want you to really demonstrate that you understand it. You've got a clear philosophy if you're claiming points in teaching there, and that you've had outcomes as well. I think the whole concept of students first that we have in the operating plan now is something which comes across really clearly from applicants, and is so, it's so lovely to hear about when you hear people talking about students first, when they are talking about their teaching and really selling their philosophy in that way. I guess my final tip as well is that while you are there to promote yourself and to tell us about what you have done, make sure you're also not over promoting yourself. When you start, you know, sort of talking as though you're the one who's done it all, it's been entirely 100% you who's created all this change and done these amazing things, you start to feel a little uneasy, because I think we all know that behind most things we have really strong teams and collaborators and mentors and people like that too. And it's completely okay to acknowledge those people and talk about the team sort of role rather than just pushing yourself forward. I think we take that as being a little bit more honest and real when we hear about you within the broader context, rather than just you're the only person who's done this sort of activity. I think they're probably my top tips from what I had last year.
Thanks very much, Verity. They were terrific points. Before I go to Alex and Murray, I do want to come back to the 4 panellists from the promotions interviews and sort of say, what makes a good interviewee? And you've covered some of these. And most importantly, what are the major mistakes that you might have seen happen? So perhaps Grant, you know, good and bad behaviour or preparation?
Yeah, I was going to make a comment earlier. The point you made, Leslie, and others, about the update is really important to give you an opportunity to talk about what you have been doing. But remember, your interview is going to be, what, half an hour or so. I have seen an applicant spend 15 minutes talking about their update to every minute detail, and didn't leave enough time for the discussion, because the resulting questions are really around a discussion. As Leslie said, you're talking with peers. There's a bunch of people who want to see you promoted. They want to get the information out of you and make a really robust assessment of your capacity to operate at that higher level. So that's one thing I've seen done not well, is people spending too much time on that update. Yeah, I did have something else I was going to raise, but...
There'll be time if you think of it.
Yeah, probably not a good thing for an interview to forget stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Be expansive, but not too expansive. Be concise. We've all sat on, I'm sure we've all sat on selection committees where, you know, we only have half an hour and somebody takes 25 minutes on the first question, and it just gets really annoying.
I think also Wiley's point about, and others, about having vision and a strategy, know where you want to be in 5 years and know where the promotion is going to take you. So yeah, when I'm promoted, I am going to set a trajectory, and it is going to take me here, so that when I go for promotion to level D, this is where I'm going to be, and this is how I'm going to get to that. So that long-term vision is really important and inspiring. The panel want to be inspired by you as a researcher, as a teacher, as a leader, to know where you're going and how you're going to take your research team or whoever you work with, your work group, with you on that journey.
Thanks, Grant. And I think you made the great point that the people on the panel want to see you promoted if you deserve it. It's not the Spanish Inquisition. People are not there to make your lives miserable. They're actually there to support you. So if you walk into the interview with that frame of mind, hopefully that creates a more positive feeling in you and you will perform at your best. Wiley, anything that you would say, you've said what people should do. Is there anything that you would say, please don't do? Have you seen things that were really unwise?
Well, one thing again, being prepared is important, but you have to be prepared in a kind of a reflective way. That is, you know yourself, you've got to know what you've done, why you've done it, but you've got to but don't pre-prepare answers. You're not really sure what the questions are going to be. And again, it's a very bad look to have somebody, okay, they've prepared an answer on teaching and that's their answer they give, irrespective of what the actual question was. And so that's where preparation in that kind of a way can make you come off looking robotic and make you look like you're not really very connected to what you're doing. And also it's not a very good advertisement if you can't really respond in the moment to the question. Right? The questions are not, again, it was heard, the questions are set in advance and we share them and we know what they're going to be, but they're not trick questions in any way. They're absolutely not trick questions. They're quite open questions, but they do actually ask things which are specific, right? You're not going to get a question which just says, tell us about your teaching, right? It's going to be about something to do with teaching, or tell us about your research, or tell us about your leadership and citizenship. So again, it's about preparing by looking over and just getting, being comfortable to know what it is that you have and what story you've got to tell. And then you can answer the questions that you're asked. So my one thing would, don't go in there with a set of answers that you're going to give, because that really doesn't make you look good at all.
Thanks, Wiley. Great advice. Linda, anything that you would suggest interviewees don't do?
Well, to sort of say first, a good interviewee, I think, is just somebody who engages with the panel, engages with the discussion, as in hopefully, as I said, remembers that you're talking to peers and to sort of take it from there. So the flip side of that is, one thing that I have seen is that one particular applicant only directed their answers to the chair. They didn't look at the other panel members. And I remember feeling a bit left out, essentially. And then to me, and it may have been just a coping mechanism, to just focus on one person, but to just occasionally look around, and just visually engage with the other panel members, I think is important as well, just as a personal thing.
This year it may well be this format via Zoom. We're not sure yet, I don't think.
Of course, yes.
So,
yes, that make it a bit tricky.
All right, thanks, Linda. And Verity, tips of what to do and what not to do?
I think a lot of it's already covered. Certainly my key one was, don't be unprepared. Someone coming in and looking surprised by every question or flustered by a question around something they've told us about in the application is really disappointing when you're on the panel, that's for sure. So make sure you know that and actually sit down and practice those sorts of questions with different people. I think also, don't try and fit a mold. Don't try and be the academic that you think the panel wants you to be. Try and just be yourself and let your personality come across, because that's part of your story, whether it be in research or teaching or your service that you actually do. So back yourself and don't try and alter yourself when you're in that situation. I know it's hard when you're nervous, but do your best.
Great advice. Thank you. All right. Just before I go to Alex and Murray now, some questions are coming in on the chat, but please start putting more questions in on the chat, because we should have enough time, I hope, to get to most of them. So let's go to you, Alex. You got promoted last year from A to B. Tell us about your experience in the interview, what you did to prepare, what you might have done differently. Obviously you were successful, but most of us walk out of something like that and think, oh, I wish I'd really done that. So anything that you want to tell us.
Thanks, Leslie. I hadn't done an academic promotions interview before, so it was new to me. And so it was a little daunting having 9 people on the panel. But I found the session that you ran, Leslie, last year so helpful. And I know that you mentioned this last year about that it was an opportunity rather than an interrogation. And so going in with that mindset, I think, helped. And something else that you mentioned, which I probably didn't think about until afterwards, was that it was an opportunity to tell my story to people that weren't overly familiar with what I do. And an opportunity did come as a result of one of the panel members inviting me to do some work. So that was a positive that I didn't really think about in advance. I did the 1-pager update, and I suppose I did practice that and make sure it was concise. And hopefully you, and I handed that around to each of the panel members, because I had someone tell me before that someone only handed it to one member, and just rattling off, it might have been difficult to understand. So maybe sharing, being able to share a screen would be helpful in the Zoom ones. I did prepare some responses to some general questions, or I really thought about some examples that I might use under each of the criteria. And I ran my proposed responses, or some of them that I was a little bit unsure about, past my head of department and my mentor, who were familiar with my work as well. I ensured I was familiar with the criteria, particularly around integration and application. For me, that was sometimes a little confusing. And I scored myself 0 in one of the areas in discovery. So whilst I scored myself 0, I made sure that I had that I was prepared for a question in that area and why I had done that.
And did you get asked it?
I did get asked that, yes. Yeah. And I was expecting that. I also made myself aware who the panel members were. And I'm glad I did that because one of them was a colleague. So had I not done that, I think I would have been a little bit thrown when I walked in the room. And obviously they excused themselves for the final decision. And yeah, I tried to make eye contact. I know Linda mentioned that. I found that a little bit tricky actually, because everyone was sitting all the way around. I know it's going to be different on Zoom, but trying to, I suppose most of the eye contact went to the person asking the question, but I did try to look around the room. They're my initial thoughts.
Thanks, Alex. Fantastic. Up to you, Murray. Take yourself off mute first.
Good call. Thanks, Leslie. I suppose the thing for me in terms of what I did to prepare, some basic tips. Many of you will probably already be past this point, but I actually had the promotion criteria on my wall. That was at my house in my office, and I had it on my wall for at least a year before I actually went for promotion. So everything I did, I immediately looked back to that and thought, okay, how is this going to help me get to this point or this score? And I scored myself. And the other thing I did, which was very helpful, and I think a couple of people have already mentioned this, and that is I tried to get as many mentors or people's opinions on my application and where I would score. I wouldn't show them the application. I just talk to them about it and say, hey, so in learning and teaching, I've done this. Do you think this is a 1, 2, or a 3 or something like that? And they would be fairly honest, and that was super helpful. And because of that, I was able to use the categories a little bit more to my advantage. So I tried to game it a little bit. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I recognize that I had a...
We're on to you, Murray. You know that.
Yeah, that's right.
This is being recorded too. Yeah.
Oh, good. So I recognize that I was quite strong in certain areas. So what I did was I took other things away. So rather than just sort of re-emphasize the fact that I was going to get 3 in that area, I took a couple of things away, and that really helped with things like application and integration. But of course, only do that if you're super confident. And I've had lots and lots of different opinions on this. Please just don't do it on your own opinion. So that was a couple of things. In terms of it being on the wall, I also looked at just low-hanging fruit. So areas where I could just sort of pinpoint a year in advance and really focus on that. The other things that I did that I probably could have learned or done a little bit differently is I probably would have flagged my head of department a little bit earlier about my plans for promotion, just to get their opinion on it, and also just get their sort of guidance, if you will, on areas. And they could, because again, remember, it's not just about the panel interview, it's also about all the preparation before it. They can actually help you because they want to help you. So if you're saying, look, I'm really interested in boosting up leadership, maybe it's a year or 2 out, maybe that's a little bit far, but you can talk to your head of department and they might actively help you. In terms of more practical tips, what I tried to do as well in terms of that promotion criteria, just so everyone knows, so I was going for a promotion to level C, but I actually based a lot of my work on level D. Now that's not because I'm an amazing academic, because that is the narrative that I wanted to create. So one of the big things you guys and the other panelist members have also mentioned is that you really want to create this story, this narrative, and you've got to remember that this story you're telling, you're only halfway through it. So you're trying to say, hey, I was here and then I moved up to this particular point and I'm doing really, really well. But you also want to imply or sometimes just outline very clearly that this is just part of your journey. And so all of these building blocks are leading to this other thing. And you can do that as in terms of your research. Perhaps you have a specialist area, or you can do this in terms of learning and teaching, in terms of what you're doing and where you're moving towards. So I suppose those would be my core main tips. I'll pass it back to you, Leslie.
Great. Thanks, Murray. And how did you find the experience actually in the room when you walked in and started?
Okay. Yeah, great question. I was so confident with everything. I'd done so much preparation, guys. And then I stepped into the room and I was the most nervous Nelly you've ever seen in your entire life. I walked in, and I know this is different for the Zoom applicants. I walked in, there was an entire panel, and just looking at the people, there must have been, it felt like there were 500 people on my panel. And everyone was staring at me, and I sat down, and I'm someone, I like to use a crutch, whatever that crutch is. I like to fiddle, basically, and there's nothing there to fiddle with. But they do provide you with a glass of water. So I actually have a glass of water from me. So I got this glass of water in front of me, and I don't know if you can see this, but I was just shaking. This water was absolutely shaking. I was so nervous. I had to get my other hand to bring the water back down. And so I became, it's very funny.
Donald Trump's been watching you.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I actually kind of became known, even though I was successful, everyone said to me that no one actually drank any water in any of the interviews. I was the last pal, and I was the reason you don't want to do that. But anyway, so yeah, super nerve-wracking, even though I was very, very confident. Because everyone was so nice, it took me 2 or 3 minutes and I was fine. But just remember that everyone is, as everyone's already said, everyone's trying to help you.
Can I just say from the other side of the table about Murray being nervous, from the other side of the table, Murray appeared to be the most ludicrously confident and self-assured interviewee anyone had ever seen. So yeah, if you were feeling nervous, Murray, you're very, very good at hiding it, because it didn't come across that way at all.
That's very, very nice of you to say, and that will help stroke this ego wonderfully. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. All right, well, thank you. That got us going super well. All right, keep those chat questions coming in, but I have a few that we prepared earlier because some people were very organised and sent some in, so I'll deal with those first. So that first one, which we've mentioned earlier about the process of providing an update, we will get back to you on that. It may be, as somebody mentioned earlier, simply a matter of sharing a screen briefly on Zoom, but please bear in mind you don't want to spend the whole half hour on that. But we'll talk to HR and get back to you on that. But it would be a good idea to start putting the update together so that you don't leave anything out by the time you come to your interview. Second one was this: how do I justify spending time pursuing my own career development goals when this does not always seem to align with the group/department/university goals for the specific career level or position that I'm in? Would any of our panelists like to tackle that one? So it's coming from somebody that feels they're a little bit at odds, I guess, with the criteria or what they feel is being looked for. Wiley, do you want to start to tackle that? Or anybody else? Just leap in, panelists. Take yourselves off mute and leap in.
I'd say, I mean, surely it will only depend on whether you're asked a question around that. That's the first thing. And I don't think you would necessarily. I don't think you have to justify working on your career development goals. That's an expectation for all of us. So I doubt you would get a question along those lines. Unless I've misunderstood the question. I don't know about the other panelists, but that's my
it seems to me that's kind of why you're there in a way. It's like what you've done is what you've done, and that's
I think as well though, we know what our university's after. Like, we've got the new operating plan now, and I think most of us, even if we work in very individual spots, we somehow do align with that. So my research is in rare diseases. I don't have a big group here, but what I'm doing is really pursuing, improvements for improving the patient experience. I'm able to work with students and clinicians both here at the university and outside the university. So I think if you can really examine some of those areas, I'd be really surprised if you didn't find some alignment, and being able to describe what that alignment is really important. Like, I would not say you're not there to meet the university's strategic goals, because that's what we're all here for. So you need to find how you align with them. And you don't have to align with every single one by any means. We all have our own different areas that we pursue as well. But I think there will be some key areas, and that's what you need to focus on and make sure you make very clear. If it hasn't come across in your application, take the opportunity of the interview to really make that a priority as one thing to get across. That would kind of be my thoughts.
Thanks, Verity. Grant?
I think an important point in the promotion criteria is that you are a team player, that you are not a lone wolf. As great as you may be, you are dependent on those around you. And we want people at the university who are team players, who contribute to the collegiality and strength as a group of the university. So you do need to demonstrate how you lead, because leadership and citizenship are such an important part process. So you need to demonstrate how you lead. You need to demonstrate how you're a team player. And for those perhaps who haven't applied but are thinking about promotion in the next few years, they are really the important things that you probably need to actively pursue. Your research and your teaching probably comes as a natural process in your academic, day-to-day business, but pursuing excellence in leadership and citizenship are something that may take a bit more planning, but are equally important as the rest.
Thanks. And if I could add from the perspective of what our intention was when we set up the promotion scheme, is that when we did focus groups around this, almost everybody said to us, oh, well, I'm not a regular academic because of X. Everybody feels that they're special, and indeed everybody is special. So if you're feeling that what you're doing is a little bit at odds to the university goals, you're not alone. I think probably everybody feels like that, at least sometimes, or sometimes all of the time. And the whole point of this new scheme is to actually capture the possibility of saying that your diverse set of skills and energies are valued. So don't feel that you're out of whack. Okay, thank you, everyone. So next one, I think we've probably covered this, but I'll say it anyway. What are the main aims of the questions? Is it just clarification of the application? I think a couple of you have said that already, but are there any panelists that want to add to that? Whether you think there are other aims of the questions? As Wiley, I think, said, there isn't a hidden agenda. They're not trick questions. They're actually designed, hopefully, to bring out your best self. But is there anybody that wants to say anything more on that?
From my experience, we read all the applications in detail, and sometimes you feel that some sections are a bit underdone, or you might think that a candidate is a little bit weaker, perhaps below what they self-evaluated. And so that's what you want to tease out. So we can't, that's why the questions are sort of bespoke to each person. We want to get from you what we need to promote you.
And perhaps I could just ask Alex and Murray, did you get any questions that were surprising that you hadn't anticipated?
No.
Murray was obviously so prepared, he probably anticipated everything.
I don't know about that. Certainly previous years were very helpful in terms of talking to other people who'd previously gone for promotion, in terms of asking them, hey, what sort of questions did you ask? Lots of them had remembered those questions. I got lots of similar questions. I'm sure the panelists who've been on multiple panels would recognize that the questions, even if they're different, are roughly the same in terms of what they're aiming at. So there really shouldn't be any surprises. The one question rather that took me by surprise was they said, what am I most proud of in terms of my research? Which paper am I most proud of? And I answered honestly, which is absolutely my worst paper. But anyway, so, be aware of those sorts of things. And the reason they asked that is because they were interested in that passion, which a couple of the other people have already mentioned. So don't be afraid to show that passion is probably the key thing. And even though it was my worst paper, they could tell I was so passionate about it, and I recognized it was my worst paper in the interview. So just remember that.
Yeah, and I think that's right, because as I said before, like before you come in the room, we've all read the words that you wrote. We've all seen that, but we haven't seen the person. And so the point of the questions is to get that perspective, to actually see the person responsible for those words and talking about those areas, so you can get an idea of how well across it they really are. But that's it. That's the thing we literally haven't seen till that point, is you, right, as a person talking to us. And so that's the point of the questions, I think.
Thanks, Wiley. Alex, any surprises in the questions for you?
I think no surprises, because I was prepared for the question around where I'd score myself 0. But one question that I had, I know we went through a series of questions that we were likely to get asked in this session last year. And one of them was around, if promoted, what benefit would you bring the university or your faculty? And when I gave a lot of thought to that question in advance, and each time I just kept coming up with quite a succinct answer, and it didn't feel like it was thorough enough. I think I didn't end up getting asked that question in the end, but that was the only question I felt that, was it enough what I was saying?
Okay, so thanks, Alex. So this question is about how to come across on Zoom. Let's all assume they will be on Zoom. Is it harder to develop a rapport on the internet compared to being in the room? Is it your anticipation, perhaps the panelists, that people might be more nervous on Zoom or perhaps less nervous on Zoom? Or is there any tips? Presumably don't have a really wacky virtual background.
I like wacky virtual backgrounds. It's good.
Yeah. Maybe not for your promotion interview, Wiley.
I would suggest this as a basic thing. Make sure you look at your camera rather than the screen. I know it's going to be really, really hard to create that rapport with people, but if you at least look at the camera directly, it's going to help a lot with people looking at you. You're going to want to look down, kind of like I'm doing now, at other things, but you've got to try and maintain that eye contact. That's certainly one thing I would practice before the interview, for sure.
Great tip, and I'm sure I'm not doing that right now because I'm trying to read stuff as well. The only other question that came in prior is very specific for a single person, but I'll ask it very quickly. I won't read out the whole half a page. This is a person that works in the HDRO, but is also in the Faculty of Arts. So they've got quite a, you know, an unusual combination of masters, I suppose. Is there anything I need to focus on at the interview about how to present myself because of my unconventional role? Linda, I saw, was nodding. Do you want to take this one on?
Yeah, I guess my answer to that is, of course, this is actually an opportunity to actually explain. If you think you do something unusual, this is your opportunity to actually explain that. But as you said a moment ago, Leslie, there is no usual. I mean, we're probably more unusual. Sorry, we're probably more similar to one another than we realise. We're not all that special. But also, just in particular, to say to this person, to remember that the panel actually considers applicants from disciplines across the faculty. So a wide range of disciplines. So consequently, there is no typical way of doing things. So, yeah, I don't think that they need to worry. And to talk about having to address particular questions, we don't know what the questions are going to be. So I don't think they need to be too concerned.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Linda.
That was a bit of a garbled response. Sorry.
Reassuring for that particular person.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm now going to try and zip through the chat, and I've just discovered that Emily's computer is a very sensitive mouse pad, so I might be very clumsy about this. So I'll try and get through as many as we can. We've got about another half hour. So this is from Laura. What is the difference in responsibilities and tasks between higher A and lower B levels? When is someone fit to seek promotion? Which of the panelists would like to take that on? Grant, you're unmuted.
I think this is where discussions with your HOD and with your peers is really the most valuable thing. Also, put together an application and ask people to have a look at it. And wearing a hat, I mean, I would be happy to have a look at, you know, provide advice to particularly those in FSE around this. But, you know, probably, remember your head of department is also going to write a statement in support. So you really do need their backing and their advice. So that's the best place to start. And it should be part of your PDR discussions as well, part of your planning to go for promotion.
I can see other panelists nodding. Anybody else want to add? Okay. Let's move on. I know Wiley's been busy on the typing and has answered some of these questions, but I'll just touch on a few quickly. Are there any interviews at every sub-step, say A6 to A7? No, that is not the case. It's only, you should go from level A6 to 7 simply by advancing by another year, unless you've done something wrong. So it's only to go between the major levels. From Laura, how much time do people usually stay on one level before seeking promotion? I'd say just, again, it's up to you. And the advice to seek wisdom from your head of department as to whether they think you're ready. I should also say that at times people do go and talk to their head of department, and the head of department might have a different view from the potential applicant as to whether they're ready or not. You are able to still apply even without the support of your head of department. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens, and people do get promoted. You know, we do recognise that sometimes there are personality differences, and it will be a panel decision, not a head of department decision. But on the whole, obviously guidance from your head of department and their support is certainly better than not having it.
And guys, I think it's also important just to say, yes, that I am not, being on a panel, like you look through all the documents, that the head of department's report is one of the documents that is there. I would say in my experience, that's not a particularly important one compared to the other things. And ultimately what is really important is the case that you've made and how you conduct yourself. And I think don't allow yourself to fall into this trap that sometimes people do, that your head of department has a veto over whether you get promoted or not, or whether you can apply, because they absolutely don't. And I can say that I have yet to have a committee experience where for a candidate, the head of department's report was a matter of discussion for the actual committee. It's not, you know, as Leslie says, it's important to, as part of the process, to talk to them and all of that kind of stuff, but don't get sucked into the idea that your head of department, you need their permission, or they have a veto, or even that ultimately when you get to that stage, that their actual contribution is in any way decisive, because it really isn't actually.
Thanks, Wally. The next one's from Hassan. Is there any limitation for the panel to approve a certain percentage of promotion applications, e.g. 30% of top applicants should be selected? And does the current uncertain situation have any negative impact? The answer to those questions is absolutely not. I don't need to ask the panelists for this. There's no quota system. You will be promoted if the panel feels that you have met the criteria for promotion. And that's it. And the current financial system situation might affect in coming years the size of the academic workforce in the university, but it is not going to be taken into account as to whether you get promoted or not. You'll get promoted on your merit regardless. So I hope that's sort of clear. Okay, and Wiley has also responded in the same light. Okay. From Michael, where do I find the promotion criteria? Is there a particular website, or do I have to contact HR? Yes, go to the Macquarie University website, type in promotion criteria, promotion process, and there's a very extensive set of documents that are very easy to find. I do recognise that on the Macquarie website, it's not always easy to find things, but I think it is easy to find both the promotion criteria and a lot of detail about the process, the dates, the calendar for it, the referees, etc., etc. So it is all there. You don't have to contact HR specifically. In fact, somebody helpfully has already put in the link. Okay, I'm just zipping down now. Okay, so Wiley has pointed out to Laura, yes, there are some time restrictions set out in the policy. As a general rule, it's discouraged to apply for promotion with less than 2 years of service, because you're actually assessed based mostly on what you've done since your last promotion or since you came to Macquarie. Now, there will be exceptions to that. So once again, that's a matter of discussing with your head of department whether it is appropriate to go for promotion this year or next year, or wait further. But there are no limits, no formal limits on how long you need to stay at a level before going for promotion. You will go for promotion based on what you've been doing. All right. How important is the interview in the grand scheme of things? I will put this to the panel. Has there been a situation when a likely decision was reversed as a result of the interview? That's a great question. let me open that up to the panelists. So let's ask, say, Verity. I'll go to each of the panelists on this one.
I think the interview is important. So as the panelists, we get your applications, like Wiley said, it's got the HOD report, your referee reports and everything, and we go through that beforehand with a little spreadsheet, and we score you as well based on it. Now, from that, you may be borderline, like you might be just sort of sitting on a borderline, and an interview could push you up, but it could also pull you down slightly. So I think you need to be prepared. But if you've done a good application and you've got all that information there, then you absolutely have met the criteria. And that interview is, again, an opportunity to show the panelists that you have done that. If it is borderline, hopefully you have those other areas to really push you up and to make it far more comfortable. When I was on the panel last year, we promoted every applicant who was there. And in the interviews, there were some areas where I was like, oh, maybe not there. But even if I was to score you slightly lower in one category, I might also score you higher in another. And I think that comes around, as Grant mentioned, how you sort of can use pieces of evidence to maybe fit discovery or application or integration or your teaching. So it just depends how you kind of put that together and sell that story in your application, both written and in the interview.
Thanks, Verity. I see that Wiley has written a comment in the chat on this, but would you like to expand on that, Wiley?
Yeah, I'd say it is important. I mean, typically, again, the process is we got to list stuff ahead of time, and as Verity says, we've already kind of done individually an assignment of points in the categories, and then that you have a chance after the interview to kind of revisit that, and that the interview is really important in that sense. If you look at someone and you look at their case and you're pretty sure about it, then the interview, or either way, or you're sure that they're not, the interview doesn't really work. But once you get into that middle zone, absolutely. I mean, I said in my comment there, I've seen people who were like, yeah, okay, well, let's have a look, and then they come in and they're fantastic, and you go, okay, right, yes, well now they've. But there are also other people where you're a little, you're unsure, let's have a look at them, and they just did a terrible job in the interview. And it's like, well, now I'm wondering about this, I'm wondering whether or not you've really got a 2 here. And then when I hear you talk about it, I think, no, right? I mean, yeah, the interview, the danger of this kind of thing is we go on and on about the interview is really important. I don't want people to get really nervous about it, but just to know that, yeah, it does, it is part of the process, and it does have an impact on people. So yes, it can be quite decisive and can definitely turn around a committee from being generally on one side of the line before you come in to generally on the other side of the line. Absolutely.
Thanks, Wiley. Linda or Grant, anything more to add to that?
In my fairly limited experience, no, there hasn't been an overturn of a decision. I know that there were a couple of, one particular applicant who didn't come across as strongly in face-to-face as she did on paper, but that certainly didn't prevent her from being promoted. It was just a surprise was expressed, but then as I recall, people did say, oh, but they were very nervous. So it was sort of justified from that point of view. But again, in my experience, no, there has not been a reversal or anything like that. But rather than just maybe, as Wiley said, you come down a little bit, or the low score that they've given themselves, you go, yeah, there was a reason why they did that. So yeah.
Thanks, Linda. Grant, anything to add?
I guess I agree with all that's been said. I haven't seen an example where the decision's been reversed, but what I have found really interesting that as a panelist, we do discuss it, and what I might grade as a 2, a colleague on the panel might say, oh, I thought that was 3 because, or so we often debate some of the candidates and their suitability for promotion. So do remember, you do have a panel, and it is a collective decision on whether you are promoted or not.
Thanks, Grant.
Can I add something as well?
Yes, sorry, go for it, Alex.
I know I was thinking about applying the year before last year, and so I did a draft of my application, and I think I may have been borderline. And so I don't know if this is a too cautious approach, but I wanted to make sure that I was giving myself 9 points rather than the 8, just in case that did happen in the interview where people felt that I'd actually scored myself too high and it wasn't going to mean that I didn't get it as a result. So that maybe others might take a more, not so cautious approach, but that's what I did.
Yeah, on that one, I think there's an interesting kind of psychological kind of dynamic that goes on there, because I mean, I think obviously you can have a reaction if someone comes in, claiming 13 out of 15 points, you might go, might raise your eyebrows at that. But I think there is that danger, and there's that danger where people go the other way and just claim the minimum points. Because remember, we're asking you for a self-assessment, then we'll make our own assessment. But I think the reality is, if you claim only the minimum points, then you're not really allowing the committee to kind of go, no, we're not quite sure about that one. I mean, and then maybe they might want to knock 1 point off in one of the categories, and then that's going to leave you without enough points. I mean, so I think there's no reason, it's not a great strategy to claim the minimum points, because also remember, then you're going in there saying, yeah, I'm just promotable, right? I've just got my fingernail up there, right? That's not the way you want to present yourself. You don't have to present yourself as the greatest superstar of all time, but don't present yourself as a borderline case. Don't, So I think be honest about it, but don't try that kind of, I need to appear modest. I don't think that helps you. All right. I think what you've got to do is be honest in your self-assessment, but try to give the committee a little bit of room to move, because again, committees are groups of people. There are psychological dynamics at work there. You might have the kind of the person there who's the Grinch, who wants to kind of chip away a little bit at everybody. Well, fine. If you build in a little bit of fat there, then that Grinch can be satisfied and you'll still get promoted.
Thanks, Wiley. Murray, Mr. Confident?
Yeah, I've just got one extra thing on that, and it sort of echoes a little bit of what Wiley was talking about in my previous point, and that is try and get as many people discussing your application with you as humanly possible, preferably those like people such as all the panelists here who've been on these sorts of things, who can give you a little bit more of informed feedback, and ask them. And some of them will say 3 and some of them will say 2, and that's what happened with me. So for Wiley's example, I gave myself a 3 because my attitude was, what's the worst that can happen is they give me a 2. Now, maybe that's a little bit overconfident, but I think that, some people are going to be a little overconfident. Other people are going to be modest. Go out and talk to people, figure out where you are as a barometer, and then use that as a way to scale yourself in terms of the point system.
Actually, I just remembered something, Leslie. I just did remember one of the don'ts, I think personally. I have seen people in applications go around and benchmark themselves against other people who have been promoted in the past. Don't do that. I personally, I just think there's something off-putting about that. I think there's nothing wrong with you. You make your argument against the standards, but do not allow yourself to be drawn into a thing where you're saying, here's other people in the past who got promoted. Look, I've got better stuff than they have. It's very unedifying. And I think it creates the wrong kind of vibe about you. I think you just want to make your arguments about the actual standards and argue that you meet them, and not get involved in. I've even seen where people have even named other people, from the past, and that just creates a bad impression of you.
Wally, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I feel exactly the same way. I always find it really cringeworthy when people say, well, I need to be promoted because, and it tends to happen at the professorial level more than at the lower levels. But, my H index is this, and all of these professors have H indices that are less than mine, therefore I should be promoted. I would sort of not promote, so I would like to not promote people on that basis alone, because it's just awful. So I think that is a terrific piece of advice. The only thing I will add is that I and some of my HR colleagues have been analysing all of the promotions data from the last 3 years, because I'm actually writing a paper about it for a high degree journal. And on the whole, when you put all the 3 years worth of data together, the panel scores tend to be lower than the individual scores. So people do, blow their own trumpets a little bit more, as you would expect. Then the panel tends to be more critical. There's not a huge amount of difference. There is also a bit of movement after the interview. with some people going up and some people going down. Once again, it rarely makes a difference as to whether people get promoted or not, but it can do. And I have to say there are some gender differences there that we've been analysing, with women tending to push their scores up a little bit more after interview, and men tending to push them down. So it is the case, and this happens more at junior levels than at higher levels. That's just statistically looking at 3 years worth of data. So I'm generalising, and there's a huge amount of individual differences, but that's just what the data shows us.
Shocking.
So I think that having an interview as well as a written application in some ways levels the playing field a little bit, because some people are better at one than the other, and by having both. In fact, when we were bringing in the new scheme, the thing about the new scheme that attracted the most pushback before it came in was the compulsory interview. Lots of people didn't want to have it. They thought it was a waste of time. It's the one thing that when we have done the evaluations after the scheme was brought in, and we have done this extensively, it has been very much the case that people have said, well, I didn't really see the point of the interview, but now having been through it or being on a panel, I think it's a great idea to have it. So on the whole, most people think it's a good idea to have it.
Yeah, and in the old days, the problem was that you only got an interview, like people either sailed through and got promoted off the paper, or you got called in for an interview, and then being called into an interview is a sign that you haven't sailed through, and so it makes you look like you're marginal, and that really raises the stakes on the interview, and it's counterproductive.
And we did have a case under that scheme where somebody actually walked into an interview and promptly fainted because they're actually so nervous because of that. Yeah. Okay, next question is from Alyssa. Given how new it is, how will teaching and leadership academic be reviewed? Obviously, the 5 pillars are the same with more emphasis on teaching and leadership, but will there be any other differences in the interview? And as I think Wiley has responded, it is the case that the newest version of the promotion criteria, if you are in the teaching and leadership job family, you are allowed to claim what we're calling a super point in the column of teaching and leadership to kind of level that playing field a bit. So if you are a teaching and leadership academic, you can claim up to 4 points under teaching to make up for the fact that you probably are not going to be claiming anything in the leadership column, in the discovery column. Yeah. I don't know if any of the panelists, it is a fairly new category and not many people are in that job family at the moment. Do any of the panelists have anything to say about
I can actually add to that. I should have said to Alyssa, I was the first person in the teaching and leadership family in the university, and I went for promotion last year. I was promoted beginning of this year to level D, and that's before the changes in the policy. So I can actually say I know I went through an interview and I've been on panels doing interviews, and there literally isn't any difference. I mean, there isn't any difference in the way the interview is conducted. There's no difference in the way what the questions are, because the criteria is still all the same. It's just that obviously you don't have any expectation of research output, so discovery doesn't come into it. But for the rest of it, the criteria and everything are the same. So there's actually no difference, right? No difference at all in the approach.
Thanks, Wiley. Okay, next question was, do you find out who will be on your panel beforehand? Yes, you do. That will be public. So you'll be able to look them up, see what they do. All of that is utterly transparent. Next question from Elizabeth. Is there also a super point in the research category for people with a research only background? Now, this is a tricky one. I can tell you that the Promotions Working Party debated this very long and very hard, and in the end decided not to have it, to keep the scheme as simple as possible. And that was done on the grounds that people who are research only still do have the opportunity, and indeed in some departments and faculties, a level of expectation that they will nonetheless contribute at least to the teaching effort, so guest lectures or whatever. You can also claim mentoring of students and that sort of thing, in the sense that you are teaching those students things, so you may wish to claim some stuff in that category there if you wish. It's flexible. And there are, of course, lots of opportunities to claim in the other 3 categories as well if you're a research-only academic. So we did debate it long and hard. There were some people on the evaluation committee that would have liked to have given a super point in research for research-only staff, but on balance we came down to keeping the scheme as simple with as few exceptions as we possibly could. So some people might think that's not fair, but I assure you, thought about it long and hard. All right, that is the end of the questions on the chat for the moment. So given we've got a few more minutes left, it's been suggested that I ask the panel, can you give some example questions? So if you think back to the interviews that you conducted, that you might have asked somebody, is there anybody, or maybe Murray and Alex can actually relay some of the questions. Murray's already said that somebody asked him what he was most proud of. I think that's a great question. It's actually something that we often ask in selection committees as well. But if any of you have some examples of particular questions, please share.
Yeah, one of the things, I did already have the one where, what am I most proud of in terms of my research, is certainly one that was asked. Another really good one that was touched on by someone else that I think people get a little bit stuck on in the learning and teaching category, and that was, what is your pedagogical position with regards to learning and teaching? So where are you coming from? What's your foundation that sort of drives your focus of learning and teaching, your approach, if you will? I think that's a really good one. And I think people often forget about that one because they tend not to care so much about learning and teaching. So have that in your back pocket, so to speak, whatever that is, collaborative approach, so on and so forth. So those are the ones that pop into my head. I'll have a quick look while everyone else is talking.
I would suggest a question I've asked and been asked is what is your strategy for growing your research impact and productivity, or growing your research team? So what is your plan for sourcing research income? How are you going to get research impact for growing your research team? Something around that is a pretty standard question, I think.
Yeah. Another one has been like, what is your philosophy of HDR supervision, for example? I know that's been a question that's come up.
Great.
I got asked, what are your key contributions in the scholarship of teaching, which is an area that I scored myself the most points in. I also got asked a question around my plans for the area that I scored myself 0 in, and where I see myself going in that and why. I got asked a question around my contribution, my individual contribution on or to provide an example of that on a committee that I'd been on, either at the a faculty or university level. And an example of engagement as well.
Great.
I think there's also the very, very basic question. They often open up as like a nice little entree, if you will, is what do you, or why, more to the point, why do you feel like you should be a senior lecturer, or in my case, or a lecturer, whatever you're trying to be promoted to? Just a really broad opening question. Don't forget to sort of practice that so you're not talking inanely for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Linda or Verity, any typical questions that you could share? Linda?
No, I can't remember actually, but maybe just a related point, which is that because it is confidential, all the paperwork that we scribble on and so on, we don't take out of the room subsequently. So I actually forgot that. I actually went looking to see if I could find anything that would remind me of those questions before today. And no, so unfortunately, I can't quite remember. Basically, but as actually Grant was saying and Wiley was saying, did bring back memories that yes, these were some of the issues that that we discussed in my experience as well.
Thank you. Verity?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact question, but I know we did ask around collaboration with both research and teaching. So in terms of who are your current collaborators and how do you see this growing over the future? as well as how would, you know, being successful in this promotion help you to achieve some of your future career goals?
Great, thank you. There's a couple more questions that have come in on the chat. This one from Patrick. Does the panel see benefit in distributing points through the non-research categories, or to have a well-defined peak in the research category? Anybody want to tackle that?
I think it's really individual. I think it depends on your type of research and what your strengths are as to where those points should be aligned very much. And also, I guess sort of, you know, I'm from Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences. So in terms of research, we're often up against people from, I'm a physio, we're up against people from biomedical science where large grants and lots of grant money is always something there. So I guess we tend to sort of push our research more across to application, because that's more sort of what we do with our research. We're very much patient facing, student facing, whatever it might be there. But I think that's very disciplinary and based on your individual strengths.
Thanks, Verity. Okay, another question from Frank. How would you find the promotion interview different from or similar to the job interview? Are there any differences in the interviewer's expectations? Grant has answered, but Grant, would you like to just share verbally?
Yeah, so a job interview is finding one person from a applicant to fill one role, which is very clearly defined in terms of the skills and attributes of that person. Here we have something very different where we have a very broad set of skills and attributes with standards for each of those. And it's really a question of, do you as an applicant meet those standards? We're not looking for the best person to fit a role. We're looking for the best people to fill a whole bunch of roles.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would also add a little bit to that. Sorry, Leslie, if you wanted to go.
Oh, go ahead, Murray.
Just a little bit to that in the sense that these people know exactly who you are. For the vast majority of time when you're applying for a role, people aren't fully aware of you. So one of the big tips that I do want to really emphasize here is don't bullshit. Everyone is going to know whether you're really elaborating on something, whether you're not really giving full credit to other people, and whether you are self-aggrandizing on whatever it is you're particularly talking about. You have a little bit more room in an initial appointment just because people don't know about you quite so much. But in a promotion interview, everyone there knows you to some extent. Your opportunity to bullshit is zero. And I would really strongly recommend you not to do it, because you are going to come up a cropper very, very quickly.
Can I say too,
no bullshit.
The difference between being interviewed for a job and this type of interview is when you're being interviewed for a job, they want to figure out whether you can do the job. Whereas for this, you're being interviewed to show, to clarify that you are already doing the job. Effectively, your application is showing that you're already at that next level, and this is just to confirm that. So I think that's the difference between the two as well.
Mm-hmm. Verity or Wiley, any other thoughts on the differences between?
No, I put something on the chat, so.
Yep. Okay, great. Terrific. All right. Well, I think we've got to the end of our questions. So I'll just do one last round of all our panelists who we've probably exhausted by now. Any other, based on the sort of the tenor of the questions and the tenor of the discussion, anything else that you'd like to add to just sum up? So I'll go to the panelists first and then Murray and Alex. So Wiley, anything else?
No, I think I would echo what Murray just said. It's important to know. It's important to know that when you're talking to the panel, you're going to, in all of those different areas, there's going to be somebody there who has more experience in those areas than you do. So yeah, so you have to be realistic in what you say, because there is too much. There's no information asymmetry here, as Murray said. So just be honest and be yourself.
Actually, I've got a question that I'm surprised, before I go to everybody else, hasn't come up in the chat, which is this notion of the leadership and citizenship column. I'd really be interested in the panelists' views on how I mean, at this level, only 1 point needs to be claimed. Obviously, you can claim more. It gets to be a higher bar at levels D and E. But I'd be really interested to hear you, and I have a hidden agenda, not so hidden, I guess, because we're really looking to develop some a development program to help people improve their leadership skills, both at early career and mid-career stages. So I wonder if you've got any insights as to how well people approached that part of the application and whether you would have any advice about it.
I would say that one can be, that one can be difficult also, especially if you're looking at the people going to promotion for level B, because obviously, opportunities are less open when you're at kind of a lower level, and even from going from B to C. But I think it's important to show it's leadership and citizenship. So if you haven't had the opportunity to be in charge of something, then you can show that you're, that you're making contributions in other ways. But I guess the thing is to make sure that you've been proactive in seeking out opportunities and to do things which are constructive, to be involved in governance activities, in your department, say, and possibly in your faculty at that level. When there are, when expressions of interest go out to be on committees, try to get involved in that and try and be active when you do so. That's what I would say. I think otherwise, I think that's kind of one of the ones where people can focus on all of the other areas. And in a sense, when it comes to that area, can sometimes be a stretch because they haven't really paid much attention to it, and they've got to try and cobble together a story. But I would say my advice would be is for you to be, just to spend some time getting involved in those kinds of activities that come up. And be engaged in it when you do it, and that's something that you'll be able to supply. That'll serve you well when you're going for promotion.
Thanks, Wiley. So, Verity, any specific thoughts on the leadership and citizenship, or anything else you'd like to add at the conclusion of this session?
Yeah, I think with leadership and citizenship, often, as Wiley said, when you're, sitting at an A or a B, it is really hard to demonstrate leadership. But citizenship is something that we can all demonstrate, and having an understanding of the values of our university, our faculties, our departments, and how you meet those. And often you need to remember some of the things that you just do automatically. Many of us will be mentoring students or mentoring staff, even if it is informal, not that formal sort of process, as well as working on our own leadership and citizenship sort of skills ourselves. In that self-reflection and self-development to try and be better at what we do is part of that citizenship sort of process as well. So don't downplay those informal sides. I know particularly for part-timers, it can be even more difficult to actually have opportunities in some of those committees and things like that as well, if you're not around the days that meetings are on. So it is taken relative to opportunity, not just level, but your, ability in terms of being there with your part-time status.
Thanks, Verity. And I would personally like to add to that to say, don't think of leadership as being on a committee. That's a very, very narrow way of thinking about leadership or citizenship. Leading is actually being an agent of positive change, and you can do that at any level in all sorts of ways. So I think one of the things we're trying to get people out of thinking is, I can only be a leader if I've been put on a committee and have a title. Please think about that more broadly. But okay, Linda, any final thoughts about anything?
Just to agree exactly what you were saying, Leslie, that, just for people to think about whenever they've taken the initiative to do something in their department, in their role, that also counts as well. It's very important, and it goes along with what I think Grant said right at the beginning about being team players, not wanting lone wolves, and so on. And I'm sure there'll be many examples that people can come up with if they just think outside the box, just as you suggested, Leslie. So that was great. And just last piece of advice with regards to it is what I often tell students who are terrified about giving their first presentations. It's only just a few minutes out of your entire life, the interview. It's just to keep it in perspective. It's not this mountainous thing in front of you. It is just, 20 or 30 minutes out of your entire existence. So, and good luck.
I usually tell my students, It's a 10-minute talk. You'll still be alive at the end of it.
Get ready, exactly.
Okay, let's go to Grant.
Yeah, I have a couple of things I want to add. One is really find out what courses HR have to offer and the training opportunities that are available to you for free by the university around leadership, project management, all kinds of stuff. That's somewhere, the things you can do to really improve the leadership and citizenship part of your application and demonstrate it. And the other point it's going to make comes back to something Murray said. He said, you know, don't bullshit because people there know you. And that's very true. But at B and C, it's probable there are people that might not know you. And that's fine. But as you progress your academic career, if you get to going to a level D interview and they don't know you, that's the problem. So progressing through your academic career is also about visibility at the faculty. So when you're going for your level D interview, and certainly your level E, people should already know who you are. So you need to use these earlier stages of your career to increase your visibility, to get known around the trap so that when you go for the interview, they say, oh yeah, this is Murray. He's a confident guy who shakes when he drinks a glass of water. We know him, he's cool, and we're gonna, you know, look favorably on him. So yeah, an important part of building your career is that visibility. So get involved in university life.
Thank you, Grant. Murray, last
I just want to echo Grant's thing, and that is go to your head of department, go talk to them. They're people, often they're going to try and help you. The vast majority of the times they're going to try and help you with this, and speak to them and say, look, I don't have a lot of leadership in my CV at the moment. And although you can be involved in some initiatives that, you know, you create on your own terms, I was given one of my leadership roles just because no one else in the department wanted it. You know, and those opportunities, they might not think of you unless you actively go ask for it. So don't be afraid is essentially my thing.
Thanks, Murray. And Alex, final word from you.
I think I also wanted to let the panel know again in the interview that it was relative to opportunity, because I had a part-time role as well. And I felt that as the questions were going along, I really wanted to get something across about that I brought a different set of skills to a research intensive department. And that wasn't coming out in the questions, so I wove that into one of my responses. And I think I even said something at the end, or I just wanted to add this bit, which I know probably didn't help, but I didn't feel that had come across yet, and I wanted them to really get that sense from me. And I think the last thing I'd say was I've probably prepared more for this than I had any other kind of interview, or and it made me feel a lot more confident going in. So that was helpful.
Thanks, everybody. Listen, Megan has just reminded me that she has sent around a feedback form to all of you. We would really, really appreciate your feedback on this session because we're always trying to improve what we offer to our ECR network. But look, thank you to all of you for participating. Thank you especially to our panelists for being so generous with their time today. I personally got a lot out of it, and I think everybody listening to you will hopefully go into their interview with a great deal more confidence than they might have had without listening to your words of wisdom. So thank you so much for participating in this. We might come back to some of you next year as well, because this does tend to be a popular session. And I'm just seeing all of the thank yous now coming in on the chat. Just a reminder that we have been recording this session because not everybody could make it today. So sorry, Murray, your anecdote about the water is preserved for posterity. It will be up on the ECR website. So thank you all very, very much, and wishing you all the very, very best of luck. Not that you will need any luck at all after this.
Yes, good luck.
Thank you, everybody.
And I'll see you in the interviews. Some of you.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Bye.